let you introduce
Sure,
yourself, please.
sure. Thank you everyone for joining. I'm very excited to be here and share some hopefully practical experience and recommendations to make your life easier. My name is Elena Elkina. I'm a partner, co-founder of Aleada Consulting. We are a boutique privacy and data protection firm in the Silicon Valley. We help clients build privacy data protection programs, focusing on the risk that are applicable to their company. And I'm also co-founder of a nonprofit organization, Women in Security and Privacy. And we're an international now nonprofit organization focusing on bringing diversity into both privacy and security fields. I'm a former attorney. I've been in the legal field for over 20 years, and I kind of quit practicing law about 15 years ago, thinking that it's just not my cup of tea. I really enjoy building, and my knowledge of legal and regulatory world really helped me to become like a business advisor to companies who are dealing with various regulatory issues. And I've been doing privacy for about probably 14, 15 years. Started in financial industry, focused on healthcare for a while, software companies. And right now, like we're working with various industries across the globe, from startup to Fortune 5 companies, and excited to share the anecdotes and lesson learned and challenges that currently other companies are doing, and see if something might resonate with you. So, and please share the questions and we'll try to answer them even if we don't get to the question here. I promise you I'll respond to you if you leave your information remotely. Thank you. Going back to you, Sid.
Thank you, Elena. Firstly, really appreciate you joining us here today. And everyone on the call, welcome and good afternoon. So I'm Sidd Gavirneni. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Zeguro. And Zeguro is a cybersecurity and a cyber insurance company focusing on small and medium-sized businesses. So a little about me. I come from a cybersecurity background, nothing to do with law or privacy like Helena does. Been in cybersecurity for about 20 years now. And with an engineering background, it helps me bring an interesting perspective to the business side and product security strategy aspects of companies. So please, as Elena said, if you have any questions, go through that. And moving on to today's agenda. So the primary goal for this webinar today is to make sure that we help you understand or even get some tips on how to get started with CCPA and CPRA. Right? We'll go over the impact of CCPA and CPRA on small and medium-sized companies, go over a quick overview on what's different between these two regulations, CCPA versus CPRA. And then Elena, with all her experience, will give you some tips on how to get started with CCPA. Then we'll also briefly touch on cyber insurance and how that can also help you with CCPA compliance or any issues that you might have if you are in breach of compliance. So with that in mind, let's quickly start a poll here. Louis, do you think that you are CCPA compliant? Yes, no, I don't know. Or maybe you need your lawyer in the room before you can answer that question.
That's a lot of question, but yeah.
All right. Okay. I guess a third of the people here need their lawyers in the room. But it's good to see that no one answered, I don't know. So looks like people do have some idea of whether they are CCPA compliant or not and know what CCPA really means. So in general, if we look at CCPA, there is a huge impact on small businesses. Elena, you have seen this. I think we can talk a little about this.
Yes. And I was looking at the list of attendees and also people who registered who might join us. And I always want to prepare content knowing who the people are, because if there are a lot of attorneys or privacy professionals, and I know there are a couple of them on the list, I don't want to go into like the basics of the regulations and vice versa. So what I think that is a good combination right now, people who've done privacy and probably have a good understanding what the regulations represent, but there are also people who don't know or might not know enough. So I'll try to, it's not, the purpose of this presentation is not to go into like very like detailed requirements. What I want to do, like I'm a very practical person. I want to talk about the impact, and it's going to be a combination of looking at the practical business impact of CCPA and CPRA on the business, and also more importantly, like things, what you can do to comply with a little bit of a review of the requirements, because you can't avoid them. So that's what's driving us all. And to start, I want to kind of say, I don't know if you heard the saying, you can't manage something you don't measure. And this is something that I love to apply to my life, not only my business side and the privacy hat that I'm wearing, but also in my personal life, because it's so important to know what you have, because without it, you can really manage it. And I like data and I like numbers. And I think numbers are very, can provide you with a clear and good understanding of the situation and help you address your risk. And I was, we actually have a link in the slides to that, to what I'm going to be talking about that we will share later. But the Attorney General's office in California hired an independent research firm, and they did an economic impact assessment. And during the assessment, the organization found that the cost to businesses, the cost of compliance to businesses to comply with new California law, it's about 55 billion. It's initial cost. It doesn't require, it doesn't include maintenance or any type of sophisticated compliance program. It's just initial cost overall. And companies, what is even more interesting, companies with fewer than 20 employees, very small companies, might have to pay about 50K to become compliant as a starting point, 50K. And employees and companies with more than 500 employees would pay on average about 2 million in initial cost. And when I was looking at this assessment, I was just kind of puzzled by that, because first of all, this is only CCPA. It didn't include CPRA at that time. And I don't know, maybe those numbers will be a little bit more or less. I don't know how it's going to go. But the numbers are very interesting to me. And I also feel that they're a little bit low for smaller businesses. And my heart goes to small businesses nowadays, because they need to make sure that business grows and make sure that, the customers are happy and the business is profitable. And compliance is expensive. And a 50K, it's actually quite on the low side, because we had a few small companies that we work with, and even like to conduct a data inventory, that's one of the basic things each company should have. It's around 50K. And if you think about updating privacy notices and everything else, it does cost money. Even if you don't bring anyone else, like an attorney or consulting or a tool that will manage your privacy compliance, just the cost of employees who will manage the data privacy piece and data protection. So I feel like the numbers are a little bit on the lower side, and it's interesting to me, and I wanted to share it with you, because sometimes like companies wonder, like, how much would it cost for me to be compliant? And I always feel like, well, it never ends. And that's why the numbers, like just initial cost of compliance, is pretty expensive. And it's just very interesting to me. And we will talk about it later, that CPRA, that's the addendum, the amendment to CCPA regulation in California, is changing the threshold of what businesses will be regulated under CPRA. And presumably it does impact small businesses. So there are less small businesses that will be impacted, but I don't know. So currently the numbers that we found, that it's 75% of small businesses in California earning less than 25 millions. And we will get into this later, but the revenue number, 25 million, not the only indicator whether or not you have to comply with regulations. We will talk about it more, but yeah. I always like to look at the numbers to see, to kind of like assess the situations. And so what does it mean to you? Every time I will cover some information, I'll also would like to kind of end it with like a practical, how does it affect you? How does it impact your business? It's not cheap. and just something that you can't avoid it. You can make a business decision not to do it, and it's totally fine. And I'm sure there are some businesses who decided and took a path that I'm not going to do it. I'm going to take the risk and see if something happens, then, I'll deal with this when situation gets to it. But right now I have 24 hours a day, and I have, so many people on my team, and I need to make sure that the business is growing. And there are other companies who take a different approach and say, well, I'm just going to take it slowly, and little by little, I'm going to approach it. So it's work in progress. It's never going to be, you have different maturity levels. And I think it's up to you based on your risk appetite, how you want to approach it. But I want to kind of encourage you that don't ignore, we'll talk more about the enforcement and what's happening in California, but don't ignore the regulations, and look at them as a business opportunity, right? So as your business differentiator versus a cost or compliance check mark, and really use it to sell your business, to sell it to your customers, and how to build it as a dollar value, because privacy sells nowadays. So Sidd, I'm going to transfer it to you to talk about what a CCPA really is.
And Elena, you bring up a very good point that privacy is not cheap either way. If you want to be compliant, you have to pay. If you're not compliant, you have to pay. At the end, it's not cheap one way or the other.
Yeah.
And everyone must be aware of GDPR by now. I mean, it's been there for a long time, but CCPA is the first privacy law in the US. And it's a great step in the right direction, helping consumers protect their privacy from companies, intentionally or unintentionally, if they breach people's privacies. The CCPA was signed in 2018, in June of 2018, but it just went into effect about 9 months ago in July 2020. So there will be more changes coming up. Elena will go over that in detail, but it is really important for almost every company which is in California or operates in California to start looking into and making sure that they are compliant with CCPA if they are not yet. So Elena, I think this is your wheelhouse. For everyone, let me make it clear, I'm not a privacy expert, so Elena is the one that will be doing most of the talking today.
Yes, no worries. And I think it's nice to have like the privacy, security, like two sides of the same coin. And I, as a professional, like I cannot be a good privacy expert without talking about both. And I will talk about both today. And even though I will focus primarily on privacy, because that's what CCPA and CPRA are talking about. So as Sidd mentioned, CCPA is one of its kind, right? So, and it doesn't end here, because in last year, November, the Californian voters passed the California Privacy Rights and Enforcement Act, that's CPRA. And CPRA, in a way, replaces the California Consumer Privacy Act that the CCPA, bringing California privacy law very aligned with GDPR. And GDPR, that what Sidd mentioned, is the European Union General Data Protection Regulation. And this is something very new to the United States, because this nature of GDPR values and principles, privacy principles, is something new. And while most provisions of the CPRA do not go into effect until January 2023, so we have like this January and the following one, the changes do cover information that will be collected as of next January, meaning this coming January, even though the regulation, the CPRA is not effective, but it will apply retroactively for the data collected starting this January. So this is like very interesting, because you do have kind of like time to comply, but you need to start having process in place effective January, this coming January, because you will need to provide information to comply with the requirements effective 2023, January 1st. So and
Elena, just to clarify, you're saying that it will be applied retroactively for all data being collected since January 2020. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay, 22. Okay.
Yes. And one of the things I actually want to talk to you about is the business, right? So the basic definition of business it's interesting because one of the things that when I talk to companies, they think about, well, so does CCPA applies to me? And now, like, what about CPRA? How do I know, like, if CPRA applies to me? And this is one of the things, like the first question, the first analysis you would need to do, like talking to your attorneys or talking to your own privacy team, or just like, even like you can do it probably, just think about it. And there are a couple of things, and I want to do a comparison to illustrate what is now and what is going to happen January 1st, 2023. So CCPA currently applies to companies with revenue of 25 million and above. And CPRA doesn't change that. The only thing that CPRA clarifies that it will relate to the preceding calendar year. So meaning it's not an ongoing basis, but you have to look at your 2022, right, to make sure like if it's 25 million and more, you fall under CPRA. If it's less, it's not. It's not the only one criteria. So in addition to that, there is a threshold of how many California residents you're targeting, right? So like the CCPA right now says that if you receive information, either you get it from someone, you buy it, you sell it, or you share information from 50,000 or more California residents, not only residents, household and devices, the CCPA applies to you. CPRA doubles the threshold. So instead of 50,000, it's 100,000, which presumably kind of like shrinks the scope, and it means that more small and medium-sized businesses will not be subject to the CPRA, because right now, instead of 50,000, you have to collect information from 100,000 of consumers and households. CPRA also removed devices. So, but it will apply to consumer or households. And another thing is that under CCPA, the 50% of your annual revenue needs to be from selling California residents information, right? What CPRA does, it broadens the definition, and in addition to selling, the regulation adds sharing, so which actually expands the scope. So that also, what is interesting, CPRA adds two additional definitions or requirements to businesses. The CPRA will apply to joint ventures and partnerships, and also to a person that does business in California that is not otherwise considered a business, but that person voluntarily certified to the new CPRA enforcement agency. I'm not sure who will want to do it, but maybe because privacy sells nowadays, and many maybe sole practitioners may want to talk about themselves, how they comply with California new regulations, because again, privacy becoming not a compliance check mark, but a business differentiator. But so what does it mean to you, right? So these are like the requirements of the regulation, but kind of like when we talk to businesses, I always notice that there's a lot of complaint, and I can feel the frustration because many companies just started doing CCPA. CCPA, I think, was the fastest regulation that got into arena, and many companies still struggling to comply with CCPA and figuring out how does it apply, what data is covered, whether they sell information or not, and et cetera. There are many questions that CCPA brought to the table to businesses, big and small. And now, after just a few months in existence, the CPRA is here, and it will replace the CPA. So businesses that have taken steps to become CCPA compliance, or if you're in process of doing so, I'll say that you just need to review the CPRA and requirements and see whether it applies to you. Maybe you will be an exam because you don't have enough, data subjects or like consumers you collect information about, or maybe you, vice versa, you were not part of it, but now because CPRA is expanding its scope, not only to data that is sold, but data that is shared. So that will bring you into CPRA threshold. So I would say start looking into this, and don't wait until January 1st, 2023, because technically, even though it's effective January 1st, 2023, you need to have processes in place as soon as possible after or before even January 1st, 2022, in order for you to be in compliance. So that's an interesting thing, but it's a big question. And I think one of the first questions you need to think about, and don't ignore it, because CCPA doesn't apply to you right now. As I mentioned, there are quite a few changes, and they will be kind of like affecting you sooner than you think. And if CCPA applies, maybe CPRA will not. So really do this analysis, because it might really clarify a lot of your next steps and action you need to take. Yeah. So now, Sidd, back to you.
Yeah, and to your point, for any company to be able to do that assessment, I think the first thing everyone needs to know and understand what personal information even means. Everyone has a different definition. Personal information, PII, but is it the name of a person, or is it the SSN of a person? So in the context of CCPA and CPRA, let's do a quick poll. Let's see what everyone on this call thinks about what personal information is under CCPA. Is it just the name, email addresses, your geolocation data, or any property records?
I'll give you guys one more minute.
That's very nice. Perfect. Everyone on the call knows what it is. So that is the right answer. Property records, or any publicly available information that is from federal, state, or local government records, is not covered under personal information for CPRA. So let's talk a little more about this. When we talk about personal information, right, there are three key building blocks. Elena, would you like to?
Yes. And I want to talk about this, and some of you privacy professionals may think, oh no, like not again, like I get it, like personal information is so, I get it, what can be personal information. And what I wanted to use this time while talking about personal information, really using some anecdotes and some real examples from my experience and just industry experience to illustrate some of the issues that businesses might be having. And if you're a practitioner working with your subject matter experts in businesses, it might help you to have very good conversations with them, to educate them, because you need to build champions. So we'll speak about privacy and compliance behind closed doors when you're not in a room. And if you might be like a business person, like it will hopefully illustrate for you the implication of what regulation is requires right now. And so especially like when I do data inventory and I interview subject matter experts about what personal information a business collect, most of them still say like, we don't collect anything. And when I dive deeper and I say, well, can you elaborate a little bit? Most of them still think that personal information is something like email, name, maybe just, something that right now, like IP address or advertiser ID, more people are most like understand that is personal information. But there are so many complex situations that I want to discuss and give you an example that will be personal information. And it's not just about the information, the content, how you're using it and how you combine it with different sources. And I want to, you see a slide about like 3 blocks, right, of information. I want to go one by one and give you a couple of examples how to think through this. So, and first of all is the first of the 3 building blocks is information, right? So that's the big piece of it. And there is no limitation regarding the format or the medium of which information is contained under and the regulation will apply. It can be pictures, it can be video, it can be music, it can be written, electronic. So all of it will work. So it will make it covered under the regulation. And one thing I want to mention, when you're thinking about what information, it can be argued that not all data is information. For example, machine-to-machine communication may not be information under CCPA unless the data communicated is like expressed in a manner that is not understandable by human mind, right? Or maybe like a human will not have access to that information at all. It's only between machines. So when you think about your business case scenarios, and when, for example, you're doing data inventory and identifying all different types of information you might have access to, and then defining what is personal, think about different medium, right? The format that information is contained, because, it's not just doing the exercise, you need to apply controls. Maybe for the pictures, you'll have certain controls. The music, it's something else, written or like electronic. It can be different physical versus technical controls, right? So, but also think about data, right? Machine to machine data. Will you have access to that information? And even if you do, can you understand that, right? So this is kind of like thinking process you need to, like, nowadays you have to apply, and I wanted to highlight how important it is. The second building block, I think it's the most interesting to me and the most complex, and I really want to break it down into details and illustrate kind of implications. And again, it's helpful for you as a business person, hopefully, to think about it, or bring like some experts to help you think through the risk and controls. And as if you're a professional in the field, that it might be a good couple of examples that you can educate your businesses around. So the requirement is that personal information identifies, relates, describes, or reasonably capable of being associated with or linked directly and indirectly to a consumer. So when you think about that, basic things, the identification of an individual, it makes sense, right? So it relates to me or to a consumer, right? For example, fingerprint, right? It directly relates to me, it's mine. So there is no like thinking behind it. So it's personal information. But in some situation, for example, we had a company where it might not be so clear. For example, one company is telling me that, well, listen, I am tracking online for cookies and other tracking methods, right? Like device fingerprinting and something like that. And the information relates to a device, not a person. That device might be used by, like a whole family. So I'm not targeting a person. I am collecting information about the device. So I encourage you to like have this conversation with your teams, especially marketing, like, and educate them that just because you're targeting a device, you still collecting information to create profiles. The purpose is retargeting, especially if it is, right? So, but if the purpose is retargeting or creating some type of personalized ads to specific individuals, it's still personal information. And you still, even though you targeted a device of the person, you are doing this, and this information will be covered under the regulation. On the other hand, for example, let's say you say like you're using some kind of tool to measure traffic on your site, right? So using some web analytics services. And it could be argued that such information is not personal under CCPA or CPRA, as long as it doesn't identify an individual, right? So you just only like looking at how many visits you have per site, or how many clicks, not who clicked on it, but like how many, or just some other basic web analytics services. And the services that are using not only do not identify an individual, but also they're not used for purposes of targeting. Always don't forget, like sometimes I know companies think about only if it's just directly or indirectly identifies individuals, but also like think about the purposes. Are you using the information for targeting individuals directly or indirectly, or only for analytics, just like the site performance? So don't forget to think about this and have this conversation with your business. Like, what are you doing? How are you using information? Even if it's analytic services, are you using it for secondary purposes? So, because if you are, it might be subject to CPRA, even though it just like web traffic. Another example where I see some struggle on the business side is the fact that the personal information would include descriptions of habits or practices, right? So it's really, something that it describes my behavior, but that description can lead to identification. And I'll give you an example, like drug prescription information. It can be drug identification number, even drug name or strength of the drug, or manufacturer, selling price, number of refills, or reason for refills or use. So even like the order, forget about like the name of the patient or the doctor, but or phone number, like some information about the drug use or even the drug itself can potentially identify an individual, or a doctor prescribes that prescription. So you really need nowadays to think about like outside of the box, to think about what is personal and what is not. And finally, it's the piece where it's reasonably capable of being associated or linked directly or indirectly to an individual, right, or household. So here's a good example to illustrate where it can be challenging, because sometimes even where this information does not identify an individual household by virtue of its content or purpose, if you use it in a different content, it can, or with a different purpose, right? So an example of it would be like, let's say, a satellite location that is set up by transportation agency that is responsible for tracking buses, traffic on the street, and schedule of buses, or like, trains, and that really helps us to plan our days and navigate traffic. So the purpose of it, not to identify an individual at all, it's more around convenience and efficiency. But the information to vehicles, for example, can be also tracked, right? So that system can be used to monitor the performance of drivers and checking whether they respect speed limits, but also, tracking other cars and their license plates and speed limits of other, drivers on the street, like you and I. So in this content, even though that information is used for one purpose, but it can be used for something else. And it will be personal information under CCPA and CPRA. So what I'm saying here is, it's really important to think about outside of the box, what is personal information, what is not. And one example is more and more companies right now, what they do when they identify all personal information, they don't want anyone else to tell them what is personal, what is not. A company's approach is like, I want to know all data I collect. And I know it can be pretty significant exercise. That's why I was saying in the beginning that a data inventory will cost about 50K at minimum for a small, very small company. Well, maybe like 25, 30 if you have very limited data. But typically identifying all data that you have is a very complex exercise. It's not brain surgery. Actually, many people can do it. You don't need training, but it's a lot of details. It's like a puzzle coming together. But after that, what you do, and what many companies do nowadays, they think about, okay, this is the data I have. Now I know what I have and where I get it from. But now I'm thinking, what else do I have? Maybe this is something I receive from consumers. This is something I might receive from a third party. And maybe this is something I receive for public data set that is not personal information, but altogether, it is personal information. And it's good to think about it. What data do you have? Because in your content, it can be personal information, because what you do and why you do it, it's very important. It's not just what you have. And the last piece I want to cover is the consumer household, right? So the regulations provide what is consumer and what is household. And one thing I want to note, that sometimes the data can be deemed to be personal of multiple individuals, right? And like, for example, when you have a car and, you might be a driver, but, let's say if I have a kid, actually she might be a driver, right? And I am the car owner, and like, insurance and all information is under my name, but I might also give it to a friend to drive it. So there are multiple people, multiple individuals, and the same piece of information can be linked to different individuals. So when you're thinking about your data and what information you have, also think about how many individuals does it relate to, the same piece of information, because nowadays it's not just so simple and straightforward. So what does it mean to you? Again, so I always want to think about the business implication. So if you haven't done data inventory, and what it is, it's something that has been around for a very long time, but General Data Protection Regulation made it as a requirement, and CCPA and CPRA indirectly require it based on all other requirements. So if you haven't done this exercise, identifying what information you collect, how you collect it, how you use it, how you store it, how you delete it, you got to do it, because otherwise you can't really comply with CCPA without conducting this exercise. And when you do it, one thing to keep in mind that CCPRA, the new law that will be effective in a couple of years, introduces sensitive personal information. So when you think about all information, don't only think about personal, but also what is sensitive, because you'll have additional requirements for sensitive personal information you will need to implement. And there are new data subject rights that consumers will have related to sensitive personal information. So keep it in mind. Mm-hmm. So, and now I'm going to turn it to Sidd.
Yep, thanks, Elena. I don't think anyone could have done a better job at explaining what personal information is and all the examples. It makes it very clear for me. In the interest of time, we'll quickly summarize just the key differences in terms of the consumer rights, but then move on to the actionable items as well.
Yes.
So, Elena, would you like to?
Yes, very briefly. I'm not gonna repeat everything. So this is something very new, that consumers have new rights in the CCPA, and what CPRA done. Sorry, I'm looking at different screens because I have you guys here and I have my kind of like information here for the deck. So there are new rights, brand new rights that CPRA introduces, and I'm going to actually focus on them, and then I will talk about what is currently in place and being modified. So the new rights that CPRA introduced is right to correction. Consumer may request to correct their PHI or PHIP personal information if it's inaccurate. Also, they can opt out from decision-making technology. For example, if you're using something that automatically make a decision about, let's say, a loan application or maybe profiling, the consumer have a right to opt out. They also have a right to access information about your automatic decision-making process. So what it means, they want to know about the logic involved and what kind of outcome you might looking for. What do you want to achieve in this process? So you need to have like a description of your logic in a very basic terms available to consumers, because they may ask you to explain all of it. Also, a right to restrict sensitive personal information, how you use it, and also audit obligation. This is something very interesting. I know you probably heard about risk assessments. Now CPRA will require mandatory risk assessment that must be submitted to the new regulatory agency on a regular basis for high-risk activities. So this is something that the businesses might need to do in the future. And there are a couple of rights that have been modified by CPRA. It's right to delete and right to know. So something that you need to create, you need to explain to businesses, to consumers. Businesses now need to explain to consumers what information they collect, how they use it. So basically the same kind of data inventory process that I talked about. Now you just need to not only understand it for internal purposes, you need to explain it to consumers in very simple terms in the privacy notices and other ways how we use the information for what purposes. There is also right to opt out. CCPA now has this right, but now the right to opt out will be not only for sale of information, but also for sharing, which expands this right and obligation of businesses. There's also a right for minors to opt out. So I'm not going to cover that in details right now. And data portability. This is something that GDPR has this right, and CCPA kind of adopted a similar data portability right that consumer may request that you as a business transmit specific pieces of information to another entity. Let's say they're going to your competitor, so you need to provide this information so they can have access to it. So there is a lot of responsibility that's placed on a business by those rights, and you might get none of those requests, right? So you might just be absolutely fine, and you will never receive it. But we also have clients that get hundreds of them a day, and there is an implication. How it applies to you is that, first of all, you need to be ready to respond, and you need to understand the data you have, again, because otherwise you don't know how you're going to respond to delete, for example, or correct data. Also have a platform, how you're going to do it. Is it going to be online where consumers will submit those requests, or is it going to be you kind of like doing it manually? So something to think about. and maybe look at your current request and see how many you have, whether you need a tool to manage it, or maybe you need a team or a person, or maybe this is something you just decide on the fly. Up to you. It's a business decision. So Sidd, I'm going to transfer it back to you and try to be as fast as possible, but this area has
Elena, actually, we have a question for you. Do you see do you see this consumer data privacy, like laws and regulation, a growing issue in the future?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Do you see the consumer data privacy regulations a growing issue in the future?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's there's so many of them. And right now, like one of the things I actually been dealing right now is one very interesting scenario that is like the companies are so in pain, I would say, to just like, and they want to do the right thing. That's actually a very interesting switch in the industry, that companies want to do the right thing. They want to comply, they want to do it. But sometimes they actually hurt themselves by doing too much. And that's an interesting balance. Like you need to do something. And I'll give you an example. I think that illustrates very well. For example, right now companies can, have to provide information to be deleted. And before you do it, you need to verify the identity, right? To make sure that you deleting, first of all, right information and that person has a right, whether they're California resident and whether they actually been a client or whether you have the information. And what interesting is now companies just like really want to make sure their identity is accurate, and they tend to ask so much more information that they don't even have that. So the regulators right now getting a lot of complaints from consumers saying, well, I just have my email and I want to delete it, but they're asking for my address and my phone number. Like, why would they need it? Like, they only have my email. So the companies are setting up the data verification, the identity verification process to manage consumer requests, asking for more what they have. And there is no need. There is still like minimum necessary standard that should be applicable to any type of data processing activities, including identity verification, especially if you know you might not have all this information about consumers. So it's challenging, but I see it's growing in Europe. It's a big issue, and I think US we're gonna experience the same. But also it's a cultural change because we haven't had it in the US unless it's like a regulated industry like financial industry or healthcare. But now I think it's gonna apply to pretty much most of the business at some point, especially with federal regulation coming in, hopefully, because I really hope that's going to help businesses to comply. But now with Virginia law and other laws that are being enacted and in process of being adopted, so it's going to hit everyone.
Yeah, and then we won't go into each and every detail of CCPA and CPRA, but there's we'll send the slide deck out after the webinar to everyone attending the webinar, so you can go into these at your own pace. Could be good bedtime reading as well. Depends on how you want to do that. So quickly, all right. So Elena, in terms of just some examples, right? So me as a consumer, right? As a consumer, now especially with COVID, I shop online for the most part, right? And everyone does. So if I go to, let's say, Bloomingdale's website and add multiple T-shirts to my shopping cart, or let's say the next 2 weeks, and then the company, Bloomingdale's, uses my cart behavior and the click-through data to categorize me as someone who's ready to buy, and then start sending me follow-up messages. So in that scenario, does Bloomingdale's need to fulfill my request to access my profile and see how that data was collected?
Well, if you think about, let's break it down, right? Because I always like to teach people how to think about situation like this. So you provided your personal information to Bloomingdale's, right? Let's say if I am a shopper and I'm on a website, I provide personal information, and personal information is, in possession of Bloomingdale's. So technically Bloomingdale's knows who I am, right? So, and especially if Bloomingdale's is targeting me, and it depends what kind of message I receive too, right? So it can be operational message, more like, hey, you forgot something, like want to make sure like you if it's a gift and you purchased it and didn't forget someone's birthday, or if it's for you, like I want to make sure like we might be running out of sizes, whatever it is. Or it might be unrelated to my purchase or like potential purchase, right? It might be like, hey, here's some other things you might like based on your previous purchases, right? it depends on what it is, but in any way, the Bloomingdale's will have my information. So yeah, I can, request as a consumer, I can go back and say, tell me what you have about me. And Bloomingdale's will probably, as I mentioned before, an example, will need to verify my identity. And the processes for Bloomingdale's, I hope that they think through what it means, and they should understand what is the data they have about me that they can use for identity verification. Also, just to make sure like they understand that they don't have any other obligations, that they cannot delete the data, because there are some exceptions, especially, let's say, if you're in the financial industry, you may need to comply with GLBA, and that data is exempt from CCPA and CPRA or healthcare, right? So anyway, but yes, you can ask for that data just to receive the information about the data they have, and you have certain rights.
Well, guess what I'm doing for the next 3 days now.
And right now there are actually companies that I actually did it for myself. I was just curious how it works, because sometimes there are some of our customers experiencing that instead of consumers, there is an organization that reaches out on consumer behalf saying, you have information about so-and-so, please delete it. And of course, the company needs to verify identity, and they call us saying like, hey, can you help me? Like, what do I do? I don't even know if I have data about this person. Like, I search everywhere, I don't have it. So how do I respond? So, and I was curious about the process. So I didn't go through until the end, because I don't know how that company is going to use my data, right? So they claim they're doing this, but I'm still like suspicious, being a privacy professional. So those companies, like, you can submit your email and they go into every site you ever visited and submit a request automatically on your behalf to delete your data. Yeah. And sometimes it can be very legitimate. Like, let's say if you shop at Bloomingdale's, right? You have an account, you have a lot of information, but what if I just kind of like pass by this site and they don't have anything about me, but that site is just like worried, like, what do I do? Like, I don't even know who you are. So, but I want to do the right thing. So it's interesting how like more and more companies popping up right now that are focusing on consumer requests, and it can be troublesome for businesses.
And Elena, we have only 10 minutes now, so I'll skip through a couple of slides. Yep, and please. As Elena, you mentioned, I mean, every state will be adopting laws like this. So let's make sure that we are all prepared for it. All right. In terms of the enforcement itself, what happens when a company fails to comply? Can you give examples of the impact itself, and also just at a high level, give us an understanding of what the enforcement itself is? Yeah.
So currently, since January 1st, 2020, the Attorney General's office in California has been, started enforcement since July, right? The California came into effect in January, but enforcement didn't start until July 2020. And there are quite a few enforcement actions, but if I have to summarize them, what is happening now, and I will go into the future at a high level, the letters just didn't have any specific like complaints or enforcement from the Attorney General's office, didn't have any specific focus. There are multiple industries, different business sectors, no specific industry has been targeted, even though Attorney General's office did say that they will focus on minors and also like cross-behavioral advertising, but there was nothing specific. And also a lot of the requests that companies got from the Attorney General's office was mainly around do not sell my personal information link, which is a requirement under CCPA that you need to have that link, and also processes supporting the process of like requesting to opt out of selling personal information. And also like just in general about privacy notices not being available. So that was a lot. And what would happen if you get this letter? So you can do a couple of things, right? So first of all, what many companies should do or did is, if you get the letter, first of all, you need to respond by immediately, right? Kind of like by telling them like either yes, I'm working on it, or whatever it is. But one situation is where you might have received a letter where they say you're not doing something, but you've done your analysis and CCPA doesn't apply to you. So you'll respond and indicate the reasons why it doesn't apply. For example, either you don't meet the 25 million revenue, or this threshold, or you're regulated by HIPAA or Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, so for an exemption, so you need to explain to you. Or if you feel like, oh yeah, oh my God, I didn't do it. So what is good right now, which is quite new, you have 30 days to fix the violation under CCPA. Under CPRA, that 30 days goes away, effective 2023, January 1st. But now you have 30 days to fix it. And when you send the response to Attorney General's office, a few things can happen. The Attorney General's office may drop the case, or they may open a confidential investigation looking into your company, or they may bring enforcement, like a pseudo levy, like a fine, and if you didn't fix it in 30 days. So that's what's been happening right now. And what might happen in the future, again, I don't have a crystal ball, and it's very hard to know because this is really new. I know California is ahead of the, as always, ahead of everyone, but there is a new California Privacy Protection Agency, CCPA, and it's been created as we speak, and it got about 10 million in budget, and I think the budget is going to be increased, but there's going to be a lot of enforcement, I think, because even though it might take time for them, but I also worried about it because privacy professionals are there are not many of them, especially senior people, and if we're going to hire a lot of newbies to do enforcement, it's going to be more challenging for companies to argue and create a good argument case to support their business practices. So I'm a little bit worried about that, in addition to just in general enforcement.
Yeah, that's a great segue into giving companies an idea as to how everyone can get started with being compliant.
Yes, so very quickly, I think I said it a few times already, I cannot emphasize data inventory, basic business hygiene, and don't think about it as a compliance check mark. You will benefit. You can sell it to your businesses. Listen, like you can use data more effectively. Like a marketing team will love you to death probably because you'll give them like, hey, this is what we have. And now we know what we have and we can clearly use it. I mean, not clearly, but we can find a way to use it if needed because we will build appropriate controls in place. If you, CCPA you fall under CCPA, make sure you have the no sell button on your site and make sure you not only have it, but also understand what information fall under sale. That's an analysis that you need to conduct because if you have service providers that might be, you might fall under an exception, you don't need to have that. So there is a whole analysis. Then also I would think about like opt-out, right? Think about the process for customers to opt out. Not only customers, but potential customers also. So think about how you're going to manage it. Data subject request. There is a timing requirement that you need to comply with every request, and there is some requirements about extension. So you need to like jump on it immediately when you get a request, and if you don't, there are potential fines and violations and lawsuits. So who knows? You never know what customer has in mind or consumer. Vendor management, look at your vendor management and your third parties and see who is a service provider under CCPA, who is a third party, and CPRA brings additional definitions and different requirements. So look at your vendor management program, incident response plan, because both CCPA and CPRA brings into information security because you can't avoid it. And incidents, like no one is protected from this. It's like, it's a matter of when, right? Not, it's just if, right? So everyone will get there. So make sure you update all the notices, requirements, and make sure you have a plan what you're going to do when it happens, because you don't have much time. I don't know if you've been part of incidents. I've been, and it's like nonstop 24 hours. And it's going to bite you in the later, many years later, how many companies we've seen that they didn't do the right thing, and years later, it just all came on the surface. And training. I cannot emphasize how important training is for your company, even if it's basic training, document it, because how many regulators actually had pity on my clients and the companies I used to work in the past because they hadn't a sufficient training, because we're all human beings, we all make mistakes, and regulators are also people, they understand it. But you need to show due diligence and show your commitment. Every software you buy, every kind of like person you hire, every tool you bring, right? And every training, it shows that you committed to it. It's not just like a check mark. And again, like just data inventory needs to be constantly updated every time you make changes to your product or services, because otherwise you can't grow your company. It's not just compliance, it's a business growth. And there are, this is just like top of my head right now, because these are important things to focus on. But think about like your points, what keeps you awake at night, and focus on that. See, back to you.
Great, thanks, Elena. And one other thing that often comes up as insurance, like how does insurance play a role? Because at the end, there might be breaches, right? Whether it is intentional or unintentional, and you end up not being compliant. So now insurance policies also include coverage for data privacy breaches. So make sure that as that ultimate safety net, you also have a good cyber insurance policy, which includes coverage for data privacy incidents. It will help you pay any fines and penalties, help you deal with any lawsuits, and of course, cyber insurance comes into play for any business interruption issues as well. I know we talked a lot. We have 1 minute, but let's see if we can answer 1 or 2 questions really quick.
Yeah, and I want to just add, Sidd, like, I'm so glad you're talking about insurance, because this is something that I see more and more in our clients, and privacy is becoming part of those conversations about insurance as well, that it's quite new. And I want to say that CCPA has a right of private action. It's only for breach, right? So it's very relevant to your breach insurance, but, clients can sue you. So for unauthorized disclosure of personal information. And CPRA, doesn't explicitly attempt to alter that CCPA requirement. So, and I think, for other laws, this is something that will be part of every regulation, and maybe even expand where consumers can sue a company. So that's a really good point to bring in, and privacy is becoming part of it, because not every incident is a breach, right? But every breach becomes an incident. So you want to make sure you also protect yourself from that as well.
Exactly. Very good point.
Sweet. And we have time just for 1 question. All the other questions we'll answer via email. And we'll send you guys a recording as well as the slides after this. 1 question for both Sidd and Elena. Why do you think a lot of data breaches are happening during the pandemic?
I think because companies are not ready for work from home, and I am in the Bay Area, right? So like my office is virtual. We all work virtual on the client side. So for me, I do imply. I mean, all my work from home is set up, right? It's a VPN. It's work from all the network and everything. But everything happens so quickly, and companies were not ready to support. Even like give a computer to people to continue working, right? So, and what about like Wi-Fi and VPN? So many companies around the globe actually didn't have that. And there's so many more, like I do, my colleague does social engineering, and there's so many interesting social engineering cases right now. It's really creative, and because people don't have a lot of support they used to have.
Yeah.
And I think that's really been.
And they're on the edge, right? Everyone is just trying to figure out what's happening around them. So anytime they see a phishing email that says, here's how to deal with COVID in your workplace, they will open up that file, right? and end up going through malware and breaches. So COVID has definitely increased the number of breaches over the last year. And that relates to data privacy very well.